Good evening, George Will here. Breaking news tonight. A senior Netflix producer who worked directly on the Sussex documentary series has come forward with explosive allegations that Meghan Markle systematically fabricated content, staged scenes, and manipulated footage to create false narratives. The Whistleblower, a veteran producer with 17 years at Netflix who signed confidentiality agreements worth millions to remain silent, has now provided our investigative team with over 200 pages of internal production documents, unedited footage, and email communications that allegedly prove what critics have suspected for years. This is not rumor, this is not speculation, this is documented evidence from someone who was in the room where it happened. And what you're about to hear has profound implications not just for the Sussexes' credibility, but for their entire financial future. Netflix is conducting an internal investigation. Legal experts say contract violations of this magnitude could trigger breach of contract lawsuits seeking full recoupment of the $81 million advance plus punitive damages. We are talking about potential financial ruin, permanent industry blacklisting, and the complete collapse of the Sussex media empire. If you want to understand how this unravels and what happens when the evidence becomes public, you need to stay with me for the next 30 minutes because this story is developing rapidly and the next shoe could drop at any moment. Before we dive into the specific allegations, we need to address the question every sophisticated viewer asks when confronted with claims this serious. How do we know this is real? What evidence supports these explosive accusations? Our investigative team has spent 3 weeks vetting this material, and we can confirm multiple independent verification streams. First, we have the physical documents themselves. The whistleblower provided production schedules, call sheets, editing logs, and internal emails spanning 14 months from initial filming through final delivery. These documents contain metadata, routing information, and technical details that would be impossible to fabricate. Second, we have corroboration from 3 other Netflix employees who worked on the project, all of whom spoke on condition of anonymity, but confirmed key details about production practices and editorial disputes. Third, we have the unedited footage itself, over 40 hours of raw material that shows scenes in their original form before editing transformed their meaning and context. Fourth, we have expert analysis from 2 documentary filmmakers with decades of experience who reviewed the evidence and confirmed that the practices described violate industry standards and Netflix's own editorial guidelines. Fifth, we have the timeline correlation between when specific scenes were filmed and when events they purportedly document actually occurred, revealing temporal impossibilities that prove staging and manipulation. This investigation rests on documentary evidence from primary sources corroborated by multiple independent witnesses, supported by expert analysis, and verified through technical examination. What we are presenting tonight is not gossip, it is journalism. The Whistleblower is a producer who joined the Sussex Project in April 2021 when Netflix began developing what would become the docuseries released in December 2022. This individual had worked on critically acclaimed documentary projects, including award-winning true crime series and high-profile celebrity profiles. According to internal communications we have obtained, this producer initially expressed enthusiasm about the project, writing in an email dated April 23, 2021, that working with the Sussexes represented a chance to tell an important story about media, race, and institutional power. However, within 3 months, the tone of internal communications shifted dramatically. By July 2021, the producer was raising concerns with supervisors about what the documents describe as editorial manipulation and factual misrepresentation. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex and executive producer of the series, allegedly exercised unprecedented control over every aspect of production, demanding reshoots of scenes that did not portray her favorably, insisting on editing choices that altered context and meaning, and requiring the inclusion of staged material presented as authentic documentary footage. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex and co-executive producer, according to witness testimony, either participated in the manipulation or remained silent while it occurred. The producer attempted to resolve these concerns through internal channels, escalating to senior Netflix executives in September 2021, but was told that given the Sussex contract value and the company's investment in the relationship, production should proceed as the talent requested. By December 2021, according to emails we have reviewed, The producer informed supervisors in writing that continuing with the project as currently structured would constitute professional ethical violations and potential fraud against viewers who would believe they were watching authentic documentary content rather than curated propaganda. The allegations fall into 8 distinct categories of manipulation and fabrication, each supported by specific documentary evidence. The first category involves staged paparazzi encounters presented as authentic harassment. The unedited footage shows at least 6 occasions where paparazzi were hired by the production team, given advance notice of the Sussexes' location and timing, and instructed to photograph them in specific ways that would appear intrusive and threatening. One incident, filmed in October 2021, shows Meghan leaving a coffee shop in Montecito while photographers capture her looking distressed and shielding her face. The raw footage, however, includes 17 minutes of pre-shoot preparation where production assistants coordinate with the photographers, Meghan rehearses her distressed expression, and the director calls for multiple takes to achieve the desired emotional impact. The final edited version in the documentary presents this as spontaneous paparazzi harassment with Meghan's voiceover, describing the trauma of constant media intrusion. Internal documents show this scene required 4 separate filming sessions over 2 days and involved 5 hired photographers paid $800 each. The second category concerns fabricated timeline sequences that present events in false chronological order to create misleading narratives. The documentary includes a sequence suggesting that certain media attacks on Meghan occurred immediately after specific royal family events, implying coordinated institutional hostility. The actual timeline, verified through publication dates and metadata, shows these media stories appeared weeks or months apart and in different contextual circumstances. The editing compressed and rearranged events to manufacture a pattern that did not exist in reality. The third category involves selectively edited interviews that reverse the meaning of statements through context removal. The series includes several interview subjects who appear to criticize the royal family or support the Sussex narrative. However, the raw footage shows these same individuals making statements that contradict the documentary's thesis, providing nuanced perspectives or explicitly stating that their experiences differed from the Sussexes' characterization. These contradictory statements were systematically removed from the final edit, leaving only the material that supported the predetermined narrative. The fourth category concerns fabricated evidence of pregnancy harassment. The documentary shows Meghan discussing media speculation about her pregnancy with Archie, presenting certain tabloid articles as examples of racist and invasive coverage. However, internal production emails reveal that several of these articles were not published until after the documentary scenes were filmed, requiring the production team to artificially insert them into the timeline and present them as if Meghan was responding to coverage she could not have seen yet. One email dated August 15, 2021, from a production coordinator to the editing team states explicitly, "We need to make sure the tabloid montage matches her commentary timeline even though some of these pieces ran later. Can we blur the publication dates?" The fifth category involves manufactured family estrangement evidence. The documentary presents various communications and events as proof that the royal family cut off contact and support. However, communications metadata and witness testimony indicate that many of these alleged instances of family coldness involve the Sussexes either initiating distance, refusing offered support, or mischaracterizing normal protocol as hostile treatment. One scene shows Harry describing how he learned about Prince Philip's hospitalization through media reports rather than family notification, implying deliberate exclusion. Internal documents show that palace staff attempted to reach Harry by phone on 3 occasions before the hospitalization became public, but the calls went to voicemail and were not returned. The documentary omits this context entirely. The sixth category concerns financial misrepresentation regarding security costs and financial support. The series claims the couple was cut off financially and forced to fund their own security despite death threats and proven danger. Financial records obtained through the investigation show that Prince Charles continued providing substantial financial support, totaling approximately $4.7 million through June 2020, that the couple's security costs were partially covered by the family until they formally stepped back from royal duties, and that the couple negotiated a security arrangement with the Metropolitan Police that they subsequently refused, preferring to hire private security at substantially higher cost that they could then characterize as unfair burden. The seventh category involves staged emotional breakdown scenes. Several powerful moments in the documentary show Meghan breaking down in tears while discussing her mental health struggles, media persecution, and family rejection. These scenes were presented as spontaneous, authentic emotional moments captured by observational documentary filmmaking. The raw footage, however, shows multiple takes of these breakdown scenes, with Meghan stopping and starting her emotional display, discussing with the director whether specific lines were working, and requesting changes to lighting and camera angles during supposedly vulnerable moments. One particularly affecting scene where Meghan discusses suicidal ideation required 11 takes over 3 hours to achieve the version that appears in the final documentary. The production call sheet for that filming day, dated June 8, 2021, lists the scene as emotional breakdown mental health, 3 hours scheduled, craft services for extended shoot. The eighth category concerns fabricated expert testimony and manipulated credentials. The documentary includes several supposed experts on media, racism, and royal history who provide analysis supporting the Sussex narrative. Investigation into these individuals' credentials reveals that at least three had significantly less expertise than presented. One had never published peer reviewed research in the claimed field, despite being identified as a leading researcher, and two had personal or financial relationships with Meghan or her representatives that were not disclosed to viewers. Internal emails show that production staff raised concerns about these credential issues, but were instructed to proceed with the experts as the Sussexes wanted them presented. Let me walk you through the timeline of how this systematic deception unfolded. April 2021, Netflix formally greenslights the Sussex documentary project with an initial budget of $18 million. May 2021, the Whistleblower producer joins the project team along with 6 other production staff members. June 2021, initial filming begins with observational footage of the Sussexes' daily life in Montecito. July 2021, Meghan begins requesting specific scenes and narrative elements, submitting a 14-page document outlining desired themes, emotional beats, and messages the documentary should communicate. August 2021, the first stage paparazzi encounter is filmed with hired photographers in Los Angeles. September 2021, the producer escalates concerns to Netflix supervisors about editorial manipulation, receives response that talent preferences should guide production. October 2021, production of staged emotional breakdown scenes begins, requiring multiple filming sessions to achieve desired footage. November 2021, interview subjects are edited to remove contradictory statements and nuanced perspectives. December 2021, the producer submits written objections to continuing the project in its current form, warning of ethical violations and potential fraud. January 2022, Netflix executives meet with the producer, offer reassignment to other projects if the producer is uncomfortable, but state the Sussex series will proceed as planned. February 2022, the producer signs an extended confidentiality agreement in exchange for $250,000 payment, effectively purchasing silence about production concerns. March 2022, additional staged scenes are filmed, including fabricated family communication scenarios. April 2022, the timeline manipulation occurs during editing, rearranging events to create false chronological narratives. May 2022, expert interviews with questionable credentials are recorded and incorporated. June 2022, final editing removes remaining contradictory material and content that complicates the documentary's thesis. July 2022, Netflix leadership screens the completed documentary. No concerns are raised about factual accuracy or editorial practices. August 2022, the producer attempts one final time to raise concerns with Netflix ethics office, receives no response. September 2022, internal review is conducted but concludes that editorial choices fall within acceptable creative license. October 2022, the producer resigns from Netflix, citing irreconcilable ethical disagreements. November 2022, the documentary is finalized for December release. December 2022, the series is released to massive viewership and intense controversy. January 2023, the producer begins documenting evidence and consulting with legal counsel about whistleblower options. February 2023, the producer contacts media organizations offering to share evidence. Most decline due to legal risk concerns. March 2023, our investigative team makes contact and begins verification process. April 2023, the evidence is fully verified and the producer agrees to go public despite potential legal retaliation. Notice the pattern that emerges from this timeline. This was not spontaneous documentary filmmaking that captured authentic reality. This was a 16-month process of systematic manipulation, fabrication, and deception that transformed a documentary series into propaganda while maintaining the appearance of objective journalism. The escalation becomes unmistakable when you see these events in sequence. Early concerns were dismissed, internal objections were suppressed through financial payments and confidentiality agreements, and the final product contained fabricated material presented as authentic documentary evidence to millions of viewers worldwide. The legal consequences of this whistleblower revelation operate on multiple levels with varying degrees of certainty. Under California Business and Professions Code Section 17500, false advertising includes material misrepresentation in commercial media. Netflix marketed this series as a documentary, a term that carries specific meaning regarding factual accuracy and authentic representation of reality. If the series knowingly included fabricated scenes, staged events, and manipulated timelines while being promoted as documentary content, that constitutes false advertising under California law. The penalty provisions allow for civil liability, injunctive relief, and restitution to consumers who were deceived. Under the terms of the Netflix production agreement, which we have reviewed in contract summaries provided by sources familiar with the deal, the Sussexes warranted that all content provided would be truthful, accurate, and not infringe on any third-party rights. Breach of these warranty provisions triggers consequences including full recoupment of all advances paid, which in this case totals $81 million for the multi-year deal. Netflix would be entitled to demand return of all compensation, terminate the contract without further payment, and potentially pursue additional damages for reputational harm to the Netflix brand. Federal Trade Commission regulations governing endorsements and testimonials require clear disclosure when content is staged or when commercial relationships exist between subjects and supposed experts. The documentary's failure to disclose that paparazzi were hired, that emotional scenes were rehearsed and staged, and that some experts had undisclosed relationships with the Sussexes could constitute FTC violations subject to regulatory action and fines. The consequences tier into categories moving from most certain to most speculative. First tier, Netflix will certainly conduct an internal investigation and review all allegations with legal counsel. This investigation is already underway according to sources at the company. Second tier, if Netflix's investigation confirms material fabrication, the company will likely seek contract termination and financial recoupment to protect itself from shareholder liability and consumer fraud lawsuits. Third tier, Meghan and Harry could face civil lawsuits from Netflix seeking return of all payments plus damages, potentially totaling over $100 million when legal costs and reputational harm are calculated. Fourth tier, if Netflix terminates the contract and publicly confirms fabrication, every other media company will immediately distance themselves from the Sussexes, ending their ability to secure future deals and destroying their entire media business model. Fifth tier, individual viewers or consumer protection organizations could file class action lawsuits against both Netflix and the Sussexes, seeking refunds or damages for fraud and misrepresentation. The consequences are not limited to financial liability. This scandal permanently destroys the Sussexes' credibility on every issue they have publicly addressed. If they fabricated content in their documentary, why should anyone believe their allegations about family racism, media collusion, or institutional cruelty? The foundation of their entire public narrative collapses if the documentary is proven fraudulent. We need to analyze the possible scenarios for how this unfolds. Scenario 1. Full acknowledgement and damage control. In this scenario, the Sussexes would proactively release a statement acknowledging that certain scenes were staged or enhanced for narrative clarity express regret for any confusion about the documentary's production methods, and commit to greater transparency in future projects. This approach would involve accepting responsibility, settling quietly with Netflix to avoid litigation, and attempting to rebuild credibility through humility and honesty. The consequence would be significant immediate criticism and mockery, the end of their premium content deals, and forced reorientation toward smaller projects with lower credibility requirements. However, this scenario represents the least damaging long term option because it demonstrates accountability and prevents years of litigation. The probability assessment. This scenario requires admitting fault and accepting reduced circumstances, which contradicts every pattern of behavior demonstrated over 7 years, making it the least likely option despite being the most strategically sound. Scenario 2. Aggressive denial and legal warfare. In this scenario, the Sussexes would categorically deny all allegations, characterize the whistleblower as a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind, threaten defamation lawsuits against anyone who publishes the allegations, and mobilize their media allies to attack the whistleblower's credibility and motives. This approach would involve hiring aggressive litigation counsel, seeking to suppress evidence through confidentiality enforcement, and attempting to outlast the news cycle. The consequence would be prolonged public controversy, extensive legal costs potentially reaching millions of dollars, and eventual evidence disclosure through discovery process that would make the situation worse. However, this scenario allows them to maintain their victim narrative and rally their supporter base. The probability assessment. This scenario aligns perfectly with their established playbook of aggressive response to criticism and refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing, making it the most probable immediate reaction. Scenario 3. Selective admission with blame deflection. In this scenario, the Sussexes would acknowledge that certain production decisions were made but attribute responsibility to Netflix executives, producers, and editors who shaped the final product without the Sussexes' full awareness or control. This approach would involve claiming they trusted the professionals, were not involved in day to day editing decisions, and were themselves victims of production manipulation that misrepresented their intentions. The consequence would be partial credibility damage, but preservation of their core narrative that others are responsible for their problems. However, this scenario requires Netflix to accept blame, which the company would almost certainly refuse to do, leading to public conflict between the Sussexes and their primary media partner. The probability assessment. This scenario offers the appealing combination of partial responsibility acceptance and blame shifting, making it moderately likely as a secondary position if aggressive denial proves unsustainable. Scenario 4. Legal settlement with mutual confidentiality. In this scenario, Netflix and the Sussexes would negotiate a private settlement where the contract is terminated, partial financial recoupment occurs, and all parties agree to confidentiality provisions that prevent public disclosure of investigation findings. This approach would involve the Sussexes returning perhaps $30 to $40 million, Netflix absorbing the loss without public admission of the fraud, and carefully worded joint statements about creative differences leading to mutual decision to end the partnership. The consequence would be financial pain for the Sussexes, but avoidance of public fraud confirmation, preservation of some ability to pursue other media opportunities, and prevention of additional lawsuits that public fraud confirmation would trigger. The probability assessment. This scenario appeals to both parties' desire to avoid extended litigation and public embarrassment, making it moderately likely if Netflix's investigation confirms serious misconduct, but the company determines that public litigation would be more damaging than quiet settlement. Scenario 5. Criminal referral for fraud. In this scenario, if the evidence is sufficiently clear and the financial amount sufficiently large, either Netflix or regulatory authorities could refer the matter for criminal fraud investigation based on the monetary value of advances obtained through material misrepresentation. This approach would involve federal prosecutors examining whether the Sussexes knowingly made false warranties to obtain tens of millions of dollars in advances, which could constitute wire fraud or criminal fraud under federal law. The consequence would be criminal investigation, potential indictment, and the possibility of prison sentences if convicted. However, this scenario requires prosecutors to determine that criminal charges serve public interest and meet the high burden of proof required for criminal conviction. The probability assessment. This scenario is the least likely because fraud cases are rarely prosecuted criminally unless involving systematic long-term schemes, but given the dollar amounts involved and the public nature of the alleged deception, it cannot be completely ruled out if evidence is overwhelming. Based on everything we have examined, the pattern of aggressive response to criticism, the financial desperation created by their expensive lifestyle and declining income prospects, and the legal complexity of the situation, Scenario 2 represents the most probable immediate path with eventual evolution towards Scenario 4 if litigation proves too costly or damaging. They will deny everything, attack the whistleblower, and attempt to litigate their way to a settlement that preserves some credibility and financial position. The Netflix investigation is ongoing right now. The whistleblower evidence is being reviewed by internal legal counsel. The Sussexes have been notified that serious allegations have been made. Within weeks, Netflix will complete its internal review and make decisions about contract status and potential legal action. If Netflix terminates the contract and seeks recoupment, the Sussexes will face the largest financial crisis of their post royal lives, potentially requiring them to sell their Montecito mansion, liquidate assets, and accept that their media empire dream has collapsed completely. They have built everything on the foundation of their public narrative, the documentary that told their truth to the world. If that foundation is proven fraudulent, the entire structure collapses. Everything they have said about family, about media, about racism, about institutional cruelty, all of it becomes suspect when the documentary that was supposed to prove their case is revealed as manufactured propaganda. Type guilty in the comments if you believe Meghan fabricated content and should face legal consequences. Type innocent if you think this is another unfair attack on the Sussexes. Type settle if you think this ends with a quiet financial settlement and mutual confidentiality. Let me know what you think happens next because this story is moving fast and developments could come at any moment. If you want to know what Netflix decides when the legal actions are filed and how the Sussexes respond when they can no longer hide from this evidence, you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now because we are tracking this investigation minute by minute. The next revelation could break tomorrow because what we have covered tonight is just the documentary fabrication scandal. The real question, the one that goes even deeper into their credibility collapse, is whether other aspects of their public narrative, including the claims about their children, rest on equally fabricated foundations, and the evidence on that front raises even more disturbing questions. I am George Will, and I will see you in the next investigation.